There is a kind of a galut hadibur, an exile of the word in Israel right now. I believe from being in Israel and reading the newspaper and looking at the 24-hour news cycle on a few different channels, there's far too much talking. And the problem is, in the face of such a devastating event, people feel they have to say something, and they have to fill up print. They have to fill up time on the news cycle. And for me, there's something profoundly and deeply inappropriate about this, because this is a time of grief. And when I think all of the words being spoken, people trying to register on what should happen the so-called day after, what Netanyahu should have done, should not have done, who the blame is, those things actually don't matter right now. I just want to impart to you the sense of injury to Israel's sense of self. And very basically, if we want to know how this could have happened, it just comes down to one or two sentences. Although the intelligence was there, that this attack was being planned in some detail in 2022, the intelligence estimates were it's aspirational, not real. And therefore, there was no operation plan intact for responding to an attack of this magnitude. You'll read much more about that when the explanation comes. So there's that. And there are many reasons why there was no operational plan intact to respond to a massive attack by several thousand Hamas, I'll say militants because they're organized as a military. The deeper thing, of course, is the atrocities. It's not so much the military losing a battle, but the brutal atrocities, the rape of women, the joyous rape of corpses, the laughter, the raucous celebration as people were butchered and eviscerated, the knowledge that there are 140 Israelis kept hostage who themselves are undergoing constant rape and torture as we speak, and that the only way through this is to prosecute the war. Whenever someone says ceasefire, maybe the hostages will be let go. Israel has the cultural memory, for example, of Ran Arad, a pilot who was captured, who never ever came home. And they realize unless the hostages come home, or they're confirmed that they've all died in captivity, murdered in captivity, Israel will prosecute this war. I don't think the world can possibly understand the will of the Israeli population that this war will be prosecuted at some level. Again, Israel, of course, has to look at public opinion, has to look at what I think are thoughtless remarks, even by our own leadership. But again, I think these what appear to be thoughtless remarks, meaning not remarks that are not congruent with reality, they're thoughtful in the sense that there's an appeasing of world opinion. But from an Israeli perspective, the sense that peace could ever be had with the Palestinians, as long as Iran exists, has been completely annihilated. When people talk about the day after, Iran's going to be there the day after. When you talk about the day after with using the Palestinian Authority, Iran will be in the Palestinian Authority. As long as Iran has the power to supply weapons and leadership, Hamas cannot be destroyed because the fuel of hatred and weapons from Iran will not cease. It's a very dismal picture, because the dismal picture belies the idea that if we could just figure out some plan, peace would come. Is somehow peace will come if we can find the right details of a policy. And every time anybody talks about the details of a policy, the question is there actually will? And here we're talking about the will of Iran mostly, that there actually should be peace. And as you know, Iran is entrenched in the idea of fomenting war. You can see this with their Houthi proxies. And as I shared the past 2 times when we were in Israel, what you sense in Israel, number one, is a constant sense of grief and resolve. The grief is everywhere. Mirav and I have talked to many people, and we were I think I mentioned this last week, we were in a cafe, and we met 2 Christian missionaries from Berlin who had come down to help. The person behind us was overhearing the conversation, got really interested. After the 2 Christian women left, we turned to this person, began to ask a few questions, and within a few moments, our eyes were flooded with tears, because the question was always, where were you? Where were you? What did you go through? How did you feel? It's as if no conversation in Israel that goes past banalities, past greetings on the street, greetings in the lobby, if any conversation is going to go past that level, the grief of what happened on October 7th, the massacre, the death, and the hostages is present everywhere. As I think I mentioned to you, when you get off the airplane and you come into Israel to pass through customs, there's a passageway where there are pictures of all the hostages lined up. The last event that, particularly devoted to the war, is an exhibition at the Tel Aviv Expo Center in North Tel Aviv, where they have reconstructed the Nova camp. Of course, small scale. There's 4,000 people there. They've brought in some of the torched automobiles and stacked them. They've retrieved camping gear and rebuilt tents. They've retrieved artifacts picked up at the place where the massacre at the Nova Festival, and they've divided them up and put them in different boxes. At these tents recovered from Nova, there are musical instruments and shoes and headbands and hats. On the screen at this memorial for the victims of Nova are the 1,200 people who died that day. It's a constant rolling of images, of people's photographs. And I think I, like others, I went and I saw, and part of me was, I'm speaking for both of us, we're so overwhelmed with grief to see each one of these faces, mostly of young people. Again, about 350 or 60 soldiers who ran down without an operation plan and fought in courageous actions that will never come out or will only come out in the following months and years. And you're not able to turn away. As the 1,200 faces go across the screen, it's about maybe 10 rows down, and it's a constant presentation. Your heart says, turn away, it's too much. And something says, I have to pay homage. I can't turn away. You're allowed to walk around the exhibit and stand in front of each of these tents that people were pulled out of the tents and knifed and brutalized. You look at the cars that Hamas made sure to torch the cars so nobody could drive away. There are people standing outside the exhibit, wanted to go in and almost couldn't go in because they knew what was awaiting them. There were people standing outside the exhibit with tears. As you go into the exhibit, people walk around the exhibit crying. Tears come to my eyes to think about it. Rob and I were both devastated beyond words. We felt we had to go. We avoided it till the very end of our trip. We came out, like everybody else, just filled with both tears and grief, and then that resolve. And the resolve is, we, meaning the Jewish people, Israelis, the friends of Israel, we're not going back to the status quo ante. We're not going back to a military force on the border or in the West Bank, by the way. Hamas is in the West Bank, tolerated by the Palestinian Authority, constantly planning what Israelis call small-scale October 7th. There was just an intrusion into a kibbutz, several terrorist a yishuv, agricultural settlement on the West Bank. They tried to penetrate the border fence. They got as far as they shot somebody. The readiness squad in the settlement and soldiers arrived very quickly and eliminated the terrorists. But you don't see this every day here. The IDF is going in every single day into the West Bank, discovering these terrorist cells, these weapons factories, these plans to commit small-scale October 7th, ongoing and into the future, under the very eyes of the Palestinian Authority. So I want to communicate here, if anybody thinks that the Palestinian Authority is some kind of solution to this problem, not while they tolerate and are riddled with terrorists planning what they call small-scale October 7th. So this grim resolve is, from the Israeli side, is we're not stopping. Now, Meirav and I know people. Meirav's nephew is in Gaza. Dear family friends, have a daughter in the West Bank. So everybody knows somebody in the war. There's no anti-war movement. There's a get the hostages back movement. We understand people need to express that voice. The only way to get the hostages back is, we're not saying defeat Hamas, but certainly defang Hamas to the point where it will be in their interest to let the hostages go, because Israel has a policy now of assassination of senior leaders, and every time someone becomes a new leader, they know that their days are numbered, hopefully to the point that they'll say, please stop killing the senior leadership. They don't care if their juniors are killed, but they don't themselves want to be killed, meaning martyrdom is for the small people, not the big people. And ideally, it will be their interest to release hostages. We don't know if that'll ever come. But there's a grim resolve among Israelis, everybody that we've spoken to, that this war is not ending. There's no going back to the status quo ante, which is why the idea of a ceasefire in Israel is not only ridiculous, is morally offensive. Is morally offensive to leave this regime in power with hostages trapped in Gaza, being raped and tortured every day. It's a moral affront. So I want you to know, if anybody ever says ceasefire to you, they don't understand the reality of what's happening there. They don't understand what it would mean to leave Hitler in power, to leave the Imperial Japanese Army in power as they were committing genocide in China until almost the very end of the Second World War. That's what it sounds like to Israelis. A few more things for tonight. We had New Year's Eve in Israel, and I had already gone up to our room, and Meirav was downstairs with the revelers, and all of a sudden we heard the sirens and the booms, and it was so ironic that the poem has not yet been written, that the sky got lit up with Israeli Iron Dome shooting 24 rockets out of the sky. Had any of them landed, there would have been severe civilian casualties. We heard the boom, boom, booms in the background that sounded like fireworks at a distance. And we just didn't have the words for the irony that Hamas sent out rockets at midnight on New Year's Eve. And I thought to myself, what, they celebrate New Year's Eve in Hamas? And someone's going to write something about that, but it was just so filled with irony. And when Meirav came up from downstairs, she said everybody ran to shelters, and then when they're all clear, they went back out and continued their celebrations. So it's a nation at war. I've never been bombed. Meirav has been in Israel many times when there were rocket attacks, and she described as she would pull off the side of the highway and get out of the car and hide into a ditch, sometimes by herself, sometimes with the girls. Shuli was subjected to bombardment when she lived in a moshav very close to the Gaza border prior to her military service, where all throughout the moshav they had these one-person holes that you could go in up to the top of the head level. And when the mortars and rocks were being fired, they had an app on their phone that they had 15 seconds to find one of these holes before the settlement was rocketed. Our daughter went through this. Our other daughter, as you know, was a combat medic on the West Bank. Saw rough things. And Mirav was there during this. This is the first time that I personally was in Tel Aviv, and the alarm went off. I said, "Well, rockets are headed my way," and I went out and tried to find the sealed room in the Airbnb area we were staying. I wasn't successful, but I found what seemed to be a solid area and went back and reconnected, and it was just something people said, "Okay, now back to business." So there's a war. And if Hamas could, they would be launching 5,000 rockets a day, not 24 at New Year's Eve. So remember, the point of this war is to stop Hamas from barraging Israeli civilians and having civilians live under this constant, enduring, non-ceasing sense of war, both from Gaza and the West Bank. Israelis would rather be committed to an ongoing war than to have a ceasefire and just have these attacks continue without any attempt to as much as possible, defeat these terrorist cells and disincentivize them from every single day planning to send rockets into Israel, to bomb Israel, and to massacre Israeli civilians. That's what it's like there. There's no pause. And our daughter's friends are the generation that's been most scarred by this. It's their peers who were massacred at the Nova Festival. It's their peers in the army who went down to the Gaza envelope and fought these pitched battles with the enemy. Most of them were in their 20s and 30s, of course, some older. The residents in the settlements that were overrun by Hamas were people of all ages, as you know. And their pictures are constant. People who were hostages are appearing on the news, finally willing to tell their stories of rape and torture and brutality. It's a nation at war that if you haven't experienced a nation that is under siege. Now, thank God the IDF has been able to succeed as they have in pushing Hamas further and further down the Gaza Strip. But the threat is always there. You never know when they're going to be able to launch another 20 or 30 rockets, and they're headed your way. The last thing I want to mention to you in being in Israel is Mirav and I had an extraordinary a moment. As you know, our daughter's 30th birthday, Shuli's 30th birthday. And one thing that Shuli has done during this time is she has created a Monday night group meeting. It's called Office Hours. Most of them are people that know each other through the Masters of Computer Science program at the Reichman University, but the feelers have gone out to many people. And I was invited to speak. It was very well received by the young people in the room, but I'll share with you just one tiny theme of my talk. And I was talking about the power of ideas. And because they asked me to speak on the Kabbalah, which was a play on the term office hours, because the term office hours in Hebrew means sha'ot Kabbalah. Kabbalah means reception. So she said, "Daddy, during my sha'ot Kabbalah, which means office hours, would you mind teaching to my friends a bit on the Kabbalah? They really want to know." So one thing I wanted to impart was the power of an idea, because the Kabbalah begins, as most of you know from listening to me, the Kabbalah begins as an idea that was formed in the south of France, north of Spain, around the turn of the 1100s to the 1200s. But I use the idea of the conception of human rights as an idea that came into being at a specific time in history for specific reasons. And the idea of rights began to compete with the idea of duty. Natural law is duty. Natural rights is the rights one has against the state and others. So, if you haven't studied the history of the idea of human rights, this is completely unfamiliar ground, and those who attended were really entranced with the idea that the notion of human rights did not exist until the 1500s in starting in Germany and then into England, Scotland, and so forth. And they were really curious how an idea appears and the power that an idea has. And the more we discussed it, the more they understood that the idea of rights, which is rooted in the individual, is a double-edged sword. Because rights sets oneself apart from the group, where one has rights against other people, intruding into your property, violating your life in your pursuit of happiness. So we have rights, as it were, against the group, especially a group organized as the government. But what's lost in that is a sense of a duty to the group, which, as you know, is not spoken about much. And so this question between human rights, and this is a generation that is very, very much shaped by the idea of human rights, not so much duty. I mean, it's understood in the background, one has a duty to serve, but now this idea of duty, although not spoken about much in Israel, somewhat taken for granted. And I spoke to a few people, and I wanted to remark as Shuli's father about what I saw happening. First of all, the aching for community. Now, even though the war isn't discussed, the need to overcome the entropy of youth, where people settle into their families, their neighborhoods, their groups, and groups of friends can dissolve unless someone has the intentionality to say, we're going to exist through time. We're going to stay connected to each other. We're going to study with each other. We're going to make our lives significant with each other, and not allow ourselves end up in the atomized existence of the liberal society. And we love that as our daughter's idea. But Shuli then mentioned to us the group of people that arrive early, leave late, and are there every single time, even if they don't talk much, even if they don't participate, they're making it happen. And one young man in particular wanted to engage me on this fascinating idea that rights come at a certain point in history, that it competes with the idea of duty, and both the idea of duty and the idea of rights have their positive and negative senses. And then I shared with this young man about what was happening in that room that night, and that is arriving to this group not from the search for benefit, not for the sense of what it will do for me, because I have a duty that it exists. Even if I don't particularly benefit one night or the other, I still show up because it's a place where people can gather. And I shared with him about the life of our congregation. Certainly we've been through our journey, but I look at your faces on the screen. I think of many people who say, I'm showing up because I'm supposed to. I think many of you show up because, well, you're going to hear a good word, you're going to hear a beautiful poem, Rabbi Manny's going to give a beautiful Devar Torah, I might say something meaningful, you get to see the Shabbat table. But there's a large number of you show up every Friday night and every Shabbat morning because it's a mitzvah. It's a holy duty to keep community alive, just the duty to keep community alive. Whether you benefit this day or another day, you're performing a duty for the person who's finding their way back to Judaism, for the person who's trying to find their way to community. There is a community of people who are motivated by the duty to keep something beautiful alive. Going back to the poetic images, there's a light that if it's not kept alive by duty, the light becomes dim. So to watch our daughter and her friends remakes something like a light of Torah in a very small group. And we shared our thought that this might be the future of Israeli Judaism. I'm not happy with the state of liberal Judaism in Israel, but I think this might be the future of groups of people, and these are very smart, relatively secular young people, that when they heard my talk on Lurianic Kabbalah, they were mesmerized, they were energized by that this idea exists, and they said to me, "What do we study?" And I said, Hasidic texts are perfectly within your linguistic ability. I'll be happy to provide ongoing direction. And there's a real palpable excitement that there was a way, as relatively secular people, to shape their lives around something deep as a community going through time. My time was up. I receded to the background. And the party began, and I saw Mirav and some of Shuli's friends at the piano and singing songs and riffing in the most profoundly comedic ways. And of course, I'm sitting and thinking about the rockets from a few nights before, and the fact that everybody knows somebody who was wounded or killed or captured, and yet this great obligation within this resolve, within this grief, to celebrate life, to allow the light to come forward and not be overwhelmed by survivor guilt, and say that we have a Jewish state in order to enjoy Jewish culture and Jewish learning and enjoy our lives, with the due obligation to face the scar, to face the ongoing grief, to face the duty for the survival of the state of Israel, and I think the duty to just as human beings to bring a depth and meaning to their own lives. There's much more that we can say about many things that happened while we were there, but I want to share with you, it was, as I shared last week, the feeling that you're in the midst of something epic, of the volunteers streaming in. I went down, as you know, and worked at a settlement just 2 miles from Be'eri, where one of the biggest massacres occurred. But there are volunteers not only streaming down into the Gaza envelope, they're going into Jerusalem, into the north. There's a volunteeristic spirit in Israel that I think is, I have to say, it's unparalleled. I've never seen anything like it. No one has seen anything like it. I'll conclude with this image. Mirav and I were trying to get out to her parents, and she needed to merge into traffic. And she waved and said, can I get in? To the man in the car next to us, and he says, "Kulanu biyachad." We're all together. Of course, you can get in. And everywhere you go, you see signs. At the parking structure, instead of the price for parking, it says "Nanatzeach biyachad." We will overcome together. Everywhere you see biyachad, we're together. Achdut, unity. Nanatzeach biyachad. We'll get through this together. And then, as Mirav and I were driving, she remarked, "I don't hear anybody honking." If you've ever been in Israel and driven in Israel, you know one of the greatest features of Israeli traffic is people honking each other all the time. And we listened, and it's gone. No one's honking at anybody. And I think people realize this public displaying of frustration that someone's doing something wrong, and someone has taken your lane, and someone's going too slow or too fast, and honk, honk, honk. That for the time being, we're not going to be mad at each other. And any time someone tries to rally around, going back to the anger and the protest, it's just met with such, a kind of repugnance. You really want to go back to anger and blaming and divisiveness. You see, for every sign where someone wants to go back to divisiveness, you see something else that says, one sign we saw that says, "We're working to overcome the divisiveness in Israeli society." I mean, signs like that are everywhere. People are just putting them up. No more divisiveness. We have to get through this together. And we're going to show love to each other and careful regard for each other.